Ross Johnston. Welcome back to the podcast.
I know, back. Third time.
I want to say you're the first third-timer.
Oof.
Is that possible? I think that's true.
Oh my gosh, so flattered.
I don't mean to
goodness.
hurt anyone's feelings if I'm forgetting someone, but it's because we did 2 years now meeting up here in Florida, and because you also came on a Zoom show with me.
So 2.5.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean it was a long episode. Like we got into some things.
That's true. Good times.
So yeah, welcome back to the show. For those keeping count, we are already, I just want to bring you up to speed. We're already at about 14 or 15 puns. I'm going to say 15. So if you keep count through the episode, let me know how many we get to. We are today at the Marie Selby Botanical Gardens here in Sarasota. And this is your new gig. In fact, I still have my sticker on. This is your job now. You work here.
Yes. I have the privilege of working here. It's fantastic. So I'm an education manager. My official title now is the manager of visitor engagement. So my job is to engage all you visitors. And I had such a blast engaging all of you the last 2 hours walking around the grounds. So, I mean, granted, I only started here in April, so I'm only like 9 months in. And I've never had a job that flies by so fast because every day is a sheer treasure.
It really does seem like you enjoy it here.
Oh,
you're having fun. So it's been a good transition, and you're not quite that far from your last job. It's just, I think we almost saw it from the water down
right.
there.
Grow where you're planted, right?
Right.
Blossom wherever you're transplanted.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Is it a better commute for you? 10 minutes better or so?
Yeah. Shorter commute. I mean, I get paid to talk to people. So
right.
Just like your dream job, that we're doing it. This is what I get to do, except
it's pretty
plant focused.
Yeah, and we did a lot of plant stuff. I also want to do you a favor really quick for your ears, because that's not going to be comfy that way. Turn them around.
Like the whole thing?
Yeah. Oh. Try to put the cord on the left and see if that gets comfier.
Okay.
Put it like, up on the crown of your head. Yeah.
There it is. Perfect.
Okay, does that fit your ears better?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
It didn't strike a chord with me.
Okay. Yep. That is 16 now, folks. In fact, you know what? Let's just do this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Well, according to you, it's better on this side.
And that is 17. All right. Well, that is one of the things I love you for. You really, you embrace, like you have so much energy for all the things you get to talk about and teach people with. I know a good chunk of it is fueled by coffee, but I also think it's just you and kind of how you are. But we did learn about all types of plants today, which of course was kind of the whole idea here. And I have been to these botanical gardens before. They're fantastic. It's great to come walk around. There's like good food here. It's a nice spot. But to get kind of the behind the scenes, to get the real tour, and now that is the thing that you do, right? You're coordinating all of this information and how it goes out to people, right?
Absolutely. So I like to think of it as when you visit the gardens, if you leave knowing something new, then I've successfully done my job. So it's a education catalyst. Like, let me fuel you up to then continue this information snowball upon departing the gardens.
Right. And there was so much to learn, and also so many things that I think I will actually be able to remember. I mean, in particular, you were talking about the mangroves and the small pieces sort of that float off and float through the water, and you'll find them washed up on beaches. And now I know exactly what that looks like. And so I'll be able to know, because I've certainly seen those all over the place before.
All those little baby mangroves.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. So this is what you do. Poor Andrea in the corner. If you hear the sniffles, go ahead and do what you need to do today. You're good. You're not bothering anybody. I gave her my cold that I am now mostly over. And she was pretty furious with me last night to catch this cold.
I mean, for what it's worth, the fact that you're at a botanical garden, we can just easily blame it on all that nature in the air.
Could just be allergies and pollen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All that airborne plant sperm, right?
Right. Which is comforting to think about.
I know. Isn't that a fun thought?
Very not strange at all.
Delightful.
Okay, so give me a little rundown of all the things we did today, because what we're going to do is, for anybody who is interested, there will be a video on the Strangers YouTube channel and on the Wild Hickson's channel of our little kind of day that we had here. But just in case we missed anything, tell us what we walk us through a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So what makes Selby such a special place is that we are an epiphyte research center. So obviously we're a wonderful botanical garden for you to visit and have food and enjoy just a little urban oasis, but we also are a botanical science institution. So we specialize in epiphytes, and now you know what that is. So what are those big fancy science words? What's an epiphyte?
An epiphyte would be plants that sort of latch on to other plants instead of kind of growing out of the soil for themselves.
Fantastic. Look at you know things.
Yeah, look at
Absolutely.
that. See, I did learn things. In fact, quiz me, because I think I remember.
All right.
I bet I remember most of it.
100%. So yeah, epiphytes are the big fancy science word for air plants. So it is a classification of plant. It's not a type of plant. So there's epiphytic orchids, there's epiphytic ferns, epiphytic lichen, and vines, and all of these other types of plants can be epiphytic. Now, one of the biggest misconceptions is that epiphytes are parasites, and that's not true. So there are examples of parasitic plants. For example, mistletoe is a parasitic plant where its roots go directly into the host plant and suck out all those juices and hurt that plant. So it's kind of a plant tick, for lack of a better analogy. So I also like to think, what does that say about using mistletoe as a romantic symbol, right? It's like, kiss under the mistletoe, kiss under this parasite. I don't know. I know, right? So it's like, fascinating. So there are parasitic plants, but there are also epiphytic plants, like all these orchids that grow on structures that do not hurt the structure. So whether it's a telephone pole or an actual tree, it doesn't matter if the plant is or the host is alive or dead, or a rock or a palm tree. Then epiphyte is just piggybacking on top of it.
Right, and it needs to in some of these places in the world, right? Because you told us that the water doesn't necessarily always make it to the ground.
Right.
Very little of it makes it all the way to the ground.
Absolutely, yeah. One of my favorite science facts for rainforest ecology is just the fact that it takes about 10 minutes for one raindrop to make it from the very top of the forest canopy all the way to the ground, if it does at all, and only about 3% of sunlight actually makes it to the forest floor. So it's high real estate. It's very congested, very dense. So all these little tiny plants like orchids and ferns, they've scooted their way all the way to the top of those rainforest canopies.
You know what I didn't ask you was how they sort of get latched up there in the first place. Is that going to be wind?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Sometimes it really depends on the species. Some of them kind of catapult their seeds onto the ground and they like make their way back up the tree. Other examples of some orchids or ferns just never touch the ground at all. They just get blown from one branch to another. One of the weird things about orchids is that orchids are hypoallergenic. So for all of you snuffly people out there, it's safe to have an orchid in your house because they have like gooey pollen. So they need to be, it's very rarely wind dispersed. It has to be physically brought from like one place to another by a pollinator, which is why they have those really elaborate pollination strategies that we discussed.
Right.
So yeah, some species of orchids will never touch the ground.
Interesting. That's great. Okay, so we learned about the epiphytes.
Yes.
We also saw some bamboo as well.
Yeah.
You told us a little about that and how fast it grows and that it's grass, which is hard to picture
Right.
at scale.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
it makes sense. And that was the real thing that was news to me was the idea that because it grows, after you cut the tops off, that it is kind of a sustainable material.
Absolutely.
It's a sustainable kind of wood material that we use for lots of things.
100%. Yeah, not to be bamboozled. But fantastic. So yes,
I'm waiting for a record. I think like the more podcasts we'll do, and the better you get, obviously, and you hone your craft here, one day you'll be hitting hundreds.
Right.
That's what I'd like to see.
So yeah, these epiphytic plants have some really amazing growing strategies in order to compete against larger plants. Bamboo and grasses in general, one of their competition strategies is just growing so fast that bamboo sets the record for the fastest growing plant in the world. Theoretically, they're able to grow 35 inches in a year. In a day, excuse me. So 30.
Ross, it's a day, actually.
Come on. Yes, there it is. 35 inches in one day. So wild to think about that these plants have such accelerated growth. And then for that reason, you're right, they're absolutely a sustainable material. A lot of these hardwoods that we use for our homes or furnitures, they take years to grow, and it's just not realistically sustainable to continue to make materials from those plants. But bamboo, because it grows so fast, because you can just kind of like keep lopping the top off of it and it replenishes itself, they're a really good furniture substitute, a home substitute. People are using them for clothes. I have a bamboo toothbrush. Bamboo sheets are really breathable. So I don't know, bamboo is a really great sustainable resource that a lot of industries are pivoting towards, including beer.
Right, and this is the thing I need to get my hands on.
Yes.
Some bamboo beer. So if I've got a listener that knows how to get your hands on some, I'd be interested to know where.
Yeah. I know that they did some at Trader Joe's for a period of time. But yeah, one of the really neat things about bamboo is that because beer is in the grass family, bamboo is a good beer substitute, a good beer alternative, because unfortunately, a lot of our favorite commercially consumed plants, beer, chocolate, bananas, vanilla is a great example. So all of these plants that we rely on aren't looking so good. They're not super climate change savvy. They have really high specifications, requirements in order to be successful, whether that's conditions, weather conditions, soil conditions. So beer, for example, like the plant that, like the barley that needs special altitude temperatures. That's why they're keep moving higher and higher up the mountain. So like Colorado is a really good place to grow beer just because of the cold weather and the atmosphere, but it's getting warmer higher up. So that's kind of like messing with all of that. So bamboo is looking like a really good beer alternative. They're both grasses. There are bamboo beers out there. They're fine. They're kind of like shock top adjacent. But it's better than having no beer at all, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I can understand that. Okay, so we saw, I'm trying to remember all the things. We also talked to the Fern specialist here.
Yeah.
Whose name is?
Dr. Sally Chambers.
Dr. Sally Chambers.
Your next guest.
Is fantastic. I know. I'm going to try to get her on the show if we have time over here. And she told us all about ferns, and we have fern facts on the, if you go watch the show. It'll come out after this, so don't be upset with me. We have to actually edit it, of course. And the podcast I edit like so fast, so this will be out like in a couple days, where that will take us a minute to get through. But it will be out at some point. And what else do we do? We also talked about mangroves, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which was your specialty.
I do love mangroves. I'd say right now mangroves are my favorite plant. But I don't know, the carnivorous plants are like quickly getting there. We were supposed to have a carnivorous plant expert join us, and she had a last minute issue come up. So as a result, I had to like crunch time, like, all right, carnivorous plants facts, let's go. So now the more I learned, the more exciting they are. But yes, mangroves are, I feel like, the perfect combination of my last job as a marine biologist and now my current job doing botany. So it's a little bit of both, little wet plant.
Well, it was funny, as we were looking at the carnivorous plants, I was thinking about, I was trying to decide, like, how do I feel like this is different from a human digestive system? And I actually realized as I was explaining it's actually kind of hard to differentiate them. I mean, the more I've learned about the human digestive system, the fact is we basically have an open tube that runs all the way through us, and it makes a bunch of turns and stuff, but it's basically a giant water slide. And, like the food that we eat doesn't necessarily come into contact with us. It just comes into contact with the edges of this tube,
Right.
And so that's essentially what most of these plants are doing too. There's a tube, they make contact, they put digestive juices all over it, and the nutrients flow, through into the plant. So that made sense to me, and I realized that it's actually not that different from how we eat things.
It's less of a journey.
Right.
That essentially a carnivorous plant goes from a mouth to a stomach all in one. That the Venus flytrap has that big gaping mouth with the little trigger hairs inside. So when those trigger hairs get stimulated by whatever actually crawls inside there, then as it gradually snaps closed, it kind of transitions from that mouth structure to a stomach structure. It even creates like a liquid seal around the surrounding outside of its lips, teeth, modified leaves, to have a airtight, watertight seal. So then at that point, it's not really a mouth anymore. It's now a digestive sac that it then floods with all those wonderful digestive enzymes.
Right. Okay, so I got two fun things.
Yeah.
So the first is you were kind enough to offer us, iced tea and all sorts of things.
Oh, yeah.
I keep saying no. That I said we'd talk about it because the good news for the plants, all plants, is that Andrea and I are not really eating plants anymore. We have gone more toward not like full carnivore diet, but certainly like more of an animal-based diet, which has been a really fun transition, and we've learned a lot about it. So the plants are safe from me because I have no interest in eating them anymore.
Interesting. So the funny thing about tea is that tea is basically leaf soup. So one of the places I definitely recommend while you're in Florida is you go check out like a cedar swamp. So there's all these tannins. So the tea essentially is the decomposition isn't the right word, but just like the natural like acid leakage of fallen leaf litter into water. So all these cedar swamps actually look tea brown red just because that's the natural decomposing nature of kind of tea out in the world.
Right.
So it's the tannins in tea are present in a natural ecosystem too, which is really funny because tea is pretty acidic, and it creates a really acidic, swampy area, which is a really good strategy for the plant that make the tannins, because then they're kind of locking in their real estate, because not a lot of other things can grow in that tannin-heavy, watery environment.
That is really interesting.
Yeah,
so they're
so-
brewing their own tea for their own purposes.
Absolutely.
Okay, and this
Tea-rific.
is the other direction that I want to go, which is my main point today, which is it is so crazy to me, all of these things that plants do supposedly without sort of a brain.
Right. That's the cool part.
Because this is where like Strangers Worth Meeting really dives in, and this is my territory. This is what I talk about and think about, because we assume that all sort of intelligence is born from consciousness. You can't have intelligence without being conscious of something. But because and I think that we have that model because if you are the one defining a word, you're going to define it in the way that you understand it.
Right.
Where if you could somehow ask a plant to define it in a different way, they would have a different explanation for you.
Right.
But even getting to that step would require them to like sort of engage in our version of consciousness.
Totally.
It blows my mind to think about how plants have evolved strategies over millions and millions and billions of years to be able to do now what they do.
Yeah, see, it's an interesting thought because with all things considered, terrestrial plants are actually like a very new thing, which is kind of like, so yes, like millions of years, absolutely. But a lot of the basic like forms of life that we would easily recognize are older than plants. So like sharks are much older than plants. Crabs are much older than sharks, which are much older than plants. So with the exception of like a few species of sharks, like if you saw a prehistoric shark, you'd be like, oh yeah, that is clearly a shark. If you saw like a prehistoric crab or any crustacean, you'd be like, I get that, that's lobster adjacent. And all of these animals largely haven't changed much since the ancient seas. So terrestrial plants weirdly are a new thing within the geologic time scale, essentially. So it's weird to think that life on land is still new-ish.
Right.
Yeah, that it went from the algae in the ocean to like kind of the algae on land, which then trying to transition to like the fungal populations, which are now their own thing. And then those algal ponds then kind of became the ferns, which became like the trees. So ferns are kind of like the original land plant because they still have spores, which is like a algae hangover, essentially. So it's kind of like, I mean, I know Sally would not like this analogy, but I like to think that a fern is kind of like the missing link species, because it has like a little bit of prehistoric, but like also like a little bit of like, ooh, look at my modern plant, like woody trunks, like the Australian tree fern, for example. It's still a fern, but it has that like woody-ish stalk that isn't true bark or anything, because that's like a tree thing. But it's neat to see that it's like, oh, this will be a successful adaptation that then gradually evolved into tree bark, you know? So it's the Sasquatch missing link of the plant world.
That's fascinating. Well, the connection here that I found really interesting was learning about sort of a carnivore diet and you know, should we be eating plants and what types of plants. And the major thing that I started to put together is that all of these plants develop defense mechanisms to avoid being eaten, being destroyed, being broken down, depending on the part of the plant. So just because we are humans doing it as opposed to other animals doing it or insects doing it,
sure,
they still have these defense mechanisms to make them less appealing for us to actually eat certain parts of them. So that's often like in that kind of side of diet, a big one is generally not eating leaves, as leaves would not necessarily be something that a plant would want eaten, as opposed to eating, say, a fruit. Although even some fruits have seeds that may want to be eaten and pooped out, but not chewed, not disrupted, not completely breaking apart that seed to where it's not viable anymore. So it's all over the place. Certain plants that do this.
See, I can see the leaf argument. That's also like I never thought of it that way. That like, yes, the leaves purpose is to have that green chlorophyll to absorb the sunlight, to make the sugars, to give the plants its energy. But like I mean, fruits are delicious for the attraction of a plant-eating animal to then disperse the seeds.
Exactly. But
Right.
other animals that do eat leaves or grasses, like ruminants,
Right.
have their own strategies to be able to bypass those systems. By using sort of their own fermentation inside themselves to be able to bypass
nutrient
that
poor diet. Exactly. So the funny part is, you're right. There's all these plants that have very aggressive adaptations to say, "Don't eat me," like cacti, for example.
That's a good example.
There's all of these like palms that have these giant spines on them because their cone is not intended to be consumed. That is like, that's how they reproduce. You know, they're like central, like cycads is a really good example of like a prehistoric kind of plant adjacent, spiky, palm tree looking plant. And they have like spikes. They're really bristly. They also have like this really gooey sap. So assuming you like accidentally break off a bit, you're like Elmer glued, which is very unattractive for some deer trying to get to what they're trying to eat. So it's funny that there's all these signs. There's a really good example of a lot of species of baby tree have a really spiny trunk until it reaches adult height, where then it suddenly reabsorbs its spines because it's out of grazing height.
That's so funny. I mean, we do that. You see that in landscaping when you have those little collars around the base of small seedlings and eventually just pull them off because that would be a problem at some point. But once they're tall enough, they don't need them anymore. So you're saying they actually do that for themselves?
Yeah. There's a few species of like jacaranda immediately comes to mind. A few species of like acacia where when they're lower, smaller grazing height, they have like these big spikes that would deter you from eating the baby leaves, essentially. But once they reach their 15 feet, plus, nothing's really going to be grazing on them. So they reabsorb their spines because they're all safe. There's this other really cool species of tree that we have here, I'll have to point out, where the baby leaves look brown and they actually do a reverse color change. So then when they're small and young and fresh, the leaves already look dead to deter predators from eating the most sensitive, valuable leaves. So it's a dead-looking leaf, transitions to a big, tall green leaf, and then turns brown again when it's actually going to die. So
they're using even visual cues to say, don't eat this.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic.
It's really cool.
Well, it's the best part about learning about plants and animals and all these things. And I think I've had such great episodes just this year in science, and as I've expanded into talking about hunting and conservation there, I'm learning so much more about animals, and it's just been fantastic because I feel like I had a great education as a kid about these things, but not nearly enough. Like I would have loved to learn even more and more and more about this. And now I'm doing it myself.
Well, there's like the hardcore science, and then there's like the fun fact science that you remember, like the fun, knowledgeable. I mean, for example, going back to like fruits, for example, like fruits are delicious, so animals do like eat them, scatter their seeds, and then there's all these like symbiotic relationships of some species of nuts need stomach acid to like break them down. So like that's like a really weird symbiotic relationship where that plant is theoretically on the brink of extinction if that herbivore dies, right?
Right.
So there's a species in like the pampas of like Argentina. There's some species of bird that has to like dig up the tuber and like digest the tuber in order to pass the tuber along. So like the plant needs, I think, the rhea. But then like I have avocados on my shirt. Do you know the history of avocados?
No, I don't.
Oh my God. So avocados are technically a berry, fun fact. So most of the fruits that we call berries aren't actually berries. Most of the berries that we call berries aren't actually berries. A lot of the fruits that we don't call berries are berries. So bananas are berries, apples are berries, avocados are berries.
Okay.
The rule for a berry is that one fruit per flower makes a berry.
Okay.
Raspberries are not berries because it's multiple little flowers all kind of coming together to make one fruit. So a raspberry is called a composite fruit. So a berry's a fruit, but not all fruits are berries. So an avocado is technically a berry. The hilarious thing about avocados is that they had a symbiotic relationship, or at least So the story goes that avocados have had a symbiotic relationship with giant sloths. So like the big prehistoric North American sloths, that they were like pretty much specially designed to be consumed by giant sloths. That they're a really big berry, and they have to have a really like tough skin, and they have a delicious fruit and a giant pit. So like evolutionarily speaking, what could really pull something that big off a tree and adequately process that pit, right? Giant sloths. And then giant sloths essentially, migratory isn't the right word, but they moved around a lot. So they would pass these avocado pits as they moved. So that's kind of how the avocado became such a prominent tree. And you could pretty much almost mark where the giant sloths' routes were based on like their footprints, their dung, but also like the kind of paleobotany around prehistoric avocados.
That's so fascinating.
Yeah.
That's why it's so great when science communicates with science, when
Coolest
different
thing.
fields work together, because we can actually solve this mystery all of a sudden.
And now avocados are a really good example of something that now needs us, because theoretically, like, yes, we eat them, but like we're not passing the pits, you know? So
Right.
they are now pseudo dependent on having us like propagate them, because their natural consumer went extinct.
Right.
Which is a crazy thing to think about.
And there are so many plants that have a symbiotic relationship with humans too. They
Yeah.
need us in order to continue to propagate. But I think that when I think about all of these different evolutionary things that happen, it's so easy to think about them again from the way we look at consciousness, and to say the plant made a decision to do this because that's how we see the world, as opposed to it's a whole lot of chance, for one thing. It's a whole lot of variations that started moving in certain directions, and the ones that worked continued to go in those directions and become stronger and stronger at that thing that they did, at having a relationship with a giant sloth, where the ones who moved in another direction had relationships with smaller animals that only got them so far, and eventually they die out. And the reason it blows my mind so much is because the scale at which it has to happen is insane. The fact that it is going to take a few million years for this this lineage to be worked out, and not to mention we're still in the story. Like we're still telling the story of plants, because we decide which species we like in certain places. Grass, I think, is one of those ones where we have just so much grass, and there's likely would be so much less grass if we hadn't decided this is something we want all over the place in our yards. We like it, it's comfy, you know.
I mean, it's also kind of like that double-edged sword of you are investing your entire life into one consumer. So like theoretically, that's a really risky gambling strategy for the avocado, right? That it is relying on this very specialized animal, and like the more specialized you get, it just kind of it paints you into a corner, like evolutionarily speaking.
All your eggs are in one basket. It's a big bet.
It's a big gamble, right? That it the avocado's life is kind of the pits. But I mean, a really good example, which is a fun story that I learned just since working here, is that Darwin did this one study on an orchid, and no one could figure out how this orchid was pollinated. That it was from Madagascar, and it was a really weird shaped orchid. It had like a giant, like a deep reservoir where it kept like its nectar and pollen, and it was like too long and skinny for any bats or any known butterflies. So no one could figure out how this orchid was pollinated. And Darwin said, well, based on how this orchid is, there has to be a moth that pollinates it. Because why does it bloom at night? Why does it smell the way it does? And why does it have this super long, deep like reservoir for, well, it's for like a moth or butterfly proboscis. But then everyone was saying, well, we haven't seen this moth, so it doesn't exist. And Darwin's whole argument was, this orchid proves this moth exists. So it's like reverse rationalizing that, well, just because we haven't seen it doesn't mean it is real, but the existence of said orchid, and it's so specific, like there's nothing else that could have pollinated that orchid except this moth. But we have never seen this moth. We've never seen this moth. We've never seen how it's been pollinated. But the existence of said orchid proves that moth did exist. And they later found it. I don't recall if Darwin was the one who found the moth, but he found the orchid and made the argument that was then later proved. So it's weird to think that a lot of situations are like that, that kind of like the avocado, that by default, what could actually have eaten this? So it's kind of process of elimination.
That's wild to me.
Yeah.
I didn't expect us to have so many of those interesting links too between animals and plants today. So
Yeah.
this is a lot to process.
I mean, as you keep saying, like the part that really blows my mind is like plants do not have brains. Like they don't. And yet they are out thinking insects that do have brains, you know? I mean, granted, like organized nerves, but you know, like ganglia, like it's fine. So it's just wild to think that these plants outsmart insects. Like orchids are famous for it. Oh my gosh. There are so many examples of these orchids that mimic pheromones to get male bees to mate with them. They mimic female pheromones to get a male bee to mate with them. There's other ones that like mimic male beetle pheromones in order to get angry beetles to like fight them and then thus get pollinated. So the fact that they have outsmarted the behaviors of these animals in order for them to selfishly succeed, I guess, like it's just really cool to think that an orchid is like villainous, you know, like that they are like, let me manipulate you with my colors and my fragrances and how I am in order for me to be so self-serving. Like I think it's fascinating that it's like orchids got it. They figured it out.
Yeah, well, and I see what you're saying too, and it's a good point, but I also it's so natural, like even as you talk about it, to personify it in a way that we understand consciousness. To say, I'm going to manipulate you. I have a strategy for this, as opposed to what more likely happened, which is more one happened to have smells that were similar to this,
Trial
and
error.
then
Totally.
exactly. So, but it's so we can't tell the story of plants without doing that personification because there's just no way to fathom that kind of consciousness. And the it's also something that we do where we stack them in a fashion of which is smarter than which. So we're saying our consciousness is smarter than that one.
Totally.
And then the next one that I talk about with too many people is that like the AI consciousness, which we also can't understand, we can't fathom how that's going to work and how it is working, is going to be the next level up from us. But that's because we're the ones defining what it means to be smart. Where you could really look at these plants, many of these plants, it depends how you want to group them together. So you could say the goal for all animals is to survive as long as possible on the earth.
Sure.
You could say that, but then how does that work when you say, well, yeah, but we have lions here and antelopes here. They don't exactly mingle. So do they really both have the same goal? Or would it be that lions want to survive as long as they can and that antelopes want to survive as long as they can? So when we do that with plants, the thing I always think about is plants in general will be here long after we're here. There's no chance we will outlive plants on this planet, but we are certain to outlive a good number of species of plants because there will be ones that can thrive in whatever apocalyptic future there is and ones that can't. So it will still be species that emerge and then we'll branch into more and more species.
Yeah, I mean it's wild to think that plants, you're right. Like it's weird to think that we typically classify plants at the bottom of the food chain.
Right. In terms of intelligence, for sure.
Or just existing.
Or sometimes at the actual bottom of the food chain.
Literally at the bottom of the food chain. And then we met 4 different species of carnivorous plant that are like arguably not at the bottom of the food chain.
Right, exactly.
Like, I mean, granted, their first choice is to photosynthesize. Like that's their goal. Like so those little snap trap leaves on a Venus flytrap, they're still green. They still photosynthesize. So they're still doing that basic chlorophyll stuff. But then they've supplemented their nutrient-poor diet in the soil with literally meat. So they're eating other animals, which is wild to think about. That a pitcher plant with that big stomach-like reservoir eats a frog, which is already kind of in the middle of the food chain. So it's like pretty crazy to think that there's other examples of, I mean, some species eat small mammals, and we like to think that mammals are pretty high up on the food chain. So it's pretty cool to think that these plants over time have learned to adapt in otherwise very nutrient-poor environments where their roots wouldn't be working as successfully in order to supplement their nitrogen, phosphorus requirements with flesh.
Right. That is interesting. And well, the other thing is that I feel like so much of our rankings of at least with animals, maybe insects too, comes down to size. And I always like to think of if there was a giant Venus flytrap on the ground,
Right.
you know, we would be just as susceptible to that as any insect. It's just that we happen to be bigger than it, so it can't outforce us. But
Yeah.
when I think about little insects, like the one I always hear about is praying mantis, because they are so freaky. They can withstand so much more than we can as humans. I mean, we're soft. We need to go inside. We can handle a certain temperature range. You know, we're very
No
soft in
exoskeleton.
general.
Right. Ugh. Our endoskeletons? Lame.
Right. So
Gosh,
these
squishy.
these praying mantises would be praying mantises, praying manti, praying.
Whole
These
convent full?
praying mantises would be. Is it a convent?
I know.
Oh, that would be.
I really want it to
interesting.
be. I have no idea.
If they were 50 feet tall, we would have absolutely no chance.
Oh, yeah, no.
You know, so, but again, it's like as humans, we have put energy into
Right.
being the size that we are. And in fact, I think we're getting bigger, aren't we? I mean historically,
During the holidays, at least.
we're, certainly like
Growing
horizontally, we're, there's biggerness. This is a day. We are getting taller though, I think.
I missed that memo.
Okay.
I mean,
You did.
I literally missed that memo.
You
But
did.
carry on, size.
But the point, what was the point? There was no point. The point was, size is a part of like how we again judge consciousness and where you kind of rank.
See, it's also really interesting to think that if there was a giant praying or a giant Venus flytrap, I wonder how it would interact with people, because what it inherently is attracting wouldn't attract us. Like, we're not nectar foragers.
That's
You
true.
know? So even if there was
kind of we are. I mean,
Honey.
maple syrup or honey.
right, but I mean, if there was like not in the same way as an insect, you know? So I'm trying to think if there was a large Venus flytrap, I feel like it might attract like an anteater, for example. It's like something that is looking for sweet, sticky, maybe like bears. Maybe it would be bears,
Right.
because like bears look for honey. They look for that sappy syrup. So, I mean, unless it like, so I don't think anything it would produce would attract us, unless it would be like a commensalistic relationship. So there's all these different like mutualism, which is like where both animals kind of like mutually benefit. No, mutualism is where both animals or both symbiotes mutually benefit. Commensalism means one benefits and one like doesn't really care, and then parasitism is one gets hurt while the other one benefits.
Okay.
So, like mutualism, like an anemone and a clownfish, like they both hang out, they both love each other. It's a win. Commensalism is an example of like the sharks and then like the remoras, where the remora benefits from getting a free ride and a free meal, and the shark like doesn't really care. And then parasitism is like dog and a tick, right? That the tick benefits and the dog doesn't. But now, see, I'm thinking, I wonder if it would be like a commensalism behavior where a Venus flytrap could like catch an antelope that then like we could like poach from it, you know? So in the animal world, there's this phrase called kleptoparasitism.
This is great.
It's great.
These words are fantastic.
So there's literally a scientific term of kleptoparasitism. A perfect example is a seagull, is a kleptoparasite, where a pelican will do all the hard work. It goes diving. It has to swim underwater. It has to like scan for the fish. It does all the effort. And then that stupid seagull shows up, bullies the heck out of it, swipes their meal, or often like steals it midair, you know? So a seagull is an example of a kleptoparasite. I wonder, assuming Venus flytraps were giant and could like catch a bear or an antelope or a deer or something, we could be theoretical kleptoparasites where they just caught the thing for us. Let's mooch off of it, you know?
Right. We almost, okay. My brain isn't keeping up with my hypotheticals here, which happens often, but
Right.
I'd like it to happen less because obviously I'm a podcaster and I have to do this on the spot. But there must be other examples where we already do this in nature.
I know, right? I was just trying to think that
Because, well, we almost do it because every tool we make or tools that we make out of what was once organic material is close. If we chop down a tree in order to make a spear, it's close, but it's not
not a
still alive.
parasite,
So it's
though.
not, yeah.
right.
We've already done the harm to it.
Right.
There must be something though.
I mean,
Well, we
I don't want to think that apiaries are, because like I don't want to think that like us stealing honey from a bee is kleptoparasitism.
but it kind of is, isn't it?
I mean, that's the only one that immediately jumps to mind, but it's not at the cost of the bee, you know?
But it is somewhat, right? Because what they produce is supposed to feed their larva. Is it not?
Yeah.
That's why they produce it. But in general, I think we found sort of that there's a surplus, that as long as we're taking care of the bees,
Right.
there will be a
Right.
surplus.
So it's more like farming in that
Right.
regard. In that regard. So like, I mean, it's not comparable, I would say, to like the seagull pelican relationship, where it is basic, like it's bullying. Like I'm gonna watch you do the work.
We do it somewhat with hunting dogs, because hunting dogs are trained to go retrieve something for you per se, but then they don't get to eat it. But we do feed them something else. So you could kind of make that argument. In fact, there's not a bad argument to be made for dogs that eat kibble, which is mostly just crap, and that dog would probably biologically prefer like a bird that it goes and picks up and gets to eat that bird. Nutritionally, that would be better for it. And we take the bird and give it kibble. I mean, there's some stealing going on there.
I mean, that just made me think that's like watching all those videos of like the fisher, and then like the shark coming up and like stealing the catch off the line.
Yeah.
I'm like, that shark knew. Like that's like, oh, we got
Yeah.
parasitized. So just like, oh, look at that shark outsmart us.
Yeah. This is why. So we've talked about my fear of sharks before.
Right.
Of course, we've
but
covered
not anymore. Since you're not scared of them any longer. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, they're
Super
great.
confident.
Well, we are going duck hunting. I told you this weekend, and my
It's a foul
guest.
trip.
That's 20. My guest, who we are going with, actually does a ton of spearfishing, and he was like, "You can come spearfishing. We do that all the time." And I said, "No, hell no, actually, because to me that has got to be you are begging to have, as you say, a shark encounter when you're spearfishing."
Ooh, you remembered. The dream.
Because, and I'm not blaming the shark, but what I'm doing is going down into their world. Then I am injuring an animal and letting blood and all these electrical impulses of death go all over the water. So no surprise that a shark would come up and be very interested in what is happening there.
Yeah.
That's why I
you wouldn't
said
be the
no.
target, but you're. Yeah, I mean, I see that. Yeah, that's complicated.
I'm not saying it's the shark's fault. I'm saying I'm coming into their, like if you come into my kitchen and you grill a steak and then you set it on the counter and you leave,
it's tempting.
I'm probably going to eat it.
Right. So it would never go after you. Like it would go after what you're mutually going after.
Yeah, that's what it's there for. Yeah. But if it finds me on the way, that's a problem. Because then I'll be hurt and I'll be making hurt animal noises and sounds and not good.
Delightful.
Not good.
And
like we said, we're basically made out of pudding. So like we're so soft.
No, celery. Remember?
Celery.
From our sharks, that sharks don't like to eat people because we don't have any blubber.
Yes.
So we're like celery to a shark. We're too bony. We're too crunchy.
Right. But if a tooth goes in the wrong spot, I'm still in major trouble personally.
That's right. But then it would be super disgusted with what it just bit into. They'd be like, oh.
Right. And
just like you, they don't eat plants. Look at that.
Yes.
Spirit animal.
Well, we kind of, that is the argument, is that humans aren't really meant to do that. We're far more meant to eat animals than plants, but we can eat plants when we need to.
I mean, that omnivorous diet is just,
it's a powerful thing that we
well,
can do.
I was about to say, like, just the fact that, like, having those specific adaptations, those like specialty traits that make you very adapted towards a specific route is largely problematic.
Right.
So like, I mean, for example, birds are dinosaurs, right? This is like the perfect example. It's like, why did the dinosaurs go extinct and why did birds not, right? Because of beaks. Like, beaks were the best thing that ever showed up.
Really?
Oh, for sure. Because like a beak lets you do it all. It lets you pick for grubs. It lets you crack open seeds. It lets you rip meat. A beak is like the win-win.
That's fascinating. I never knew that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, birds literally are dinosaurs. Like, they are, like, scientifically classified as archaeosaurs. Like, they are full-blown dinosaur.
Yeah, and I mean, anyone who's ever been near a bird, especially here, we have the sandhill cranes that walk through
huge.
where we stay.
Big as I am.
It's terrifying, and the way they walk, I'm just like,
Dinosaur.
if you were 50 feet tall, I'd be terrified of you.
Dinosaur,
Oh.
for sure.
Yeah,
But like the beaks, they won. Like Tyrannosaurus Rex, awesome predator, but like those teeth had super limited adaptations that you have to eat big, fleshy things.
Yeah.
And when the world burned after that asteroid, but like the world essentially had a hard reset button. So who's going to win? The one that can do it all. Those beaks are like the dream. That's why we still have them.
right. We want to be incredibly survivable, and again, that circles all back to like, what is the point of a species? And I guess it's to continue. It's to continue, and then in our case, likely to build the next iteration of ourselves, which will be in AI.
I mean, the fun part is, just going back to the plant part that like plants are at the bottom of the food chain. Like I love to think that plants are also training animals, that they had to understand what pheromones. Well, I mean, granted, evolution, like trial and error, blah blah blah. But it's just really cool to think that plants have trained insects to help them, right? So yes, it's hard to say that. You're right, like personifying plants. So
We
like
can't help
but it's
it.
like
We can't help it.
It's so cool. Like
Yeah.
it's so cool to think that this theoretical brainless organism does talk to each other. Like we talked about that grasses have those rhizomal root nets that send chemical signals to communicate with each other. Like I'm about to bloom. Odds are you should too. That would help us out. I mean, it's like plant Tinder. So like easier to swipe right when you're all on the same app.
Right.
So
Fantastic. All right, let's talk about you as a brand.
oh, yikes.
Because you suggested a brand that I think is phenomenal. Ross J, the science gay. And I feel like
I love that you remembered that.
ready to no, it's stuck in my head now. Because I see you having this TV show and I see it absolutely blowing up because it's science for adults. And this is what I want to produce is a YouTube show of Ross J, the science gay.
I mean,
would you do it?
I mean, sign me up. Honestly, science communication is like my dream. I love talking to people about fun, crazy plants and animals and kleptoparasites and airborne plant sperm. Like these are all like really fun topics. So
Okay, we've got it recorded now. So
yeah, that'd be great.
I'm going to set you up.
Okay.
And you're going to do it because I need a podcast from you. I need a show from you.
It's not PBS Kids, but it'll be a
That's what I'm
PBS
saying.
13.
Yeah, PBS 13. Well, why couldn't it be, for kids?
That's true. That's true.
Well,
representation.
Yeah, but it would be funnier if all of the topics were gayer in general. I think that would be
a really cool Instagram you should all follow. There's this awesome page called 500 Queer Scientists, and it's largely kind of doing what you're doing, where it is shedding light on these amazing individuals from A to Z of, God, like paleontology all the way to like molecular space alien science, like tardigrades on the moon kind of thing. It is awesome. And it's like these incredible profiles of all these LGBTQ plus individuals providing this STEM science exposure, essentially. So it's good. Yeah.
Okay.
It's queer in the
We're gonna set it
laboratory.
up.
It's
That's
awesome.
what I want to do. I had another question, and then I got so distracted because my producer Andrea is just so lovely.
Oh,
This poor girl today. You're doing great. You're fantastic. Yesterday was the bad day, wasn't it, for the cold? Today? Yeah. Look at
Trooper.
you. All right, go have fun blowing your nose. I feel so bad. It was my fault, But we've always been sick around each other, even over the past year. And if I get sick, she doesn't necessarily. She's gotten sick. I don't get sick. Even in close contact, even living in a tiny box the way we do, it doesn't always happen.
Literally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Little petri dish.
I need to get you this book because I want you to read it. I want you to tell me what you think. I want your thoughts on it. So I'm going to send that to you. I actually have to send that to a few people. So
What's the book?
it's just the one about carnivore stuff.
Fun.
He's a scientist named Paul Saladino, and he's a medical doctor also, and it's just fantastic. So I need to make myself a note. But I need to send that to a few people. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the argument for veganism, the argument for like carnivore diets, everything in moderation. But our teeth are evolved in order to have that omnivorous diet.
Exactly.
So,
yeah, and again, like, and I'm not like, the thing is, I do everything in moderation. I'm in the middle of a lot of things, but this one convinced me of a concept that is essentially, we prefer and it's better for us generally to eat meat, but we certainly can turn to plants when they were needed.
Yeah, see, that's so funny.
Or for medicine, or for so many aspects. Yeah,
I never really thought about the side of the plant of the leaves aren't made to be eaten, so like here's all the strategies to not eat me. Like that's such a funny, like, look at that, like, eat my fruit.
It's almost like my go-to now when I'm looking at a new plant that I don't necessarily understand, and I go like, okay, what part would you not want me to eat? And so, or which part would you like me to eat? And it gets kind of confusing when you have tubers and roots and carrots and things like that, where it's like, maybe you kind of wanted those to be eaten, maybe not though.
See, that's also like, that gets into the whole, I was gonna say like Pomeranian pug end of like fruit and vegetables, where like the true carrots, like the real native wild carrots, are like pinky big,
right?
Because like, and then we've just genetically selected them and groomed them and made them into like edible consumption materials. That, I mean, there's no such thing as like one of these carrots like naturally, like it's like the little baby purple ones, and like all the, God, how many Peruvian potatoes are there? I mean, there are like 20 plus species of Peruvian potato.
Really?
Purple, polka dots, itty bitty, lumpy, and then obviously we eat like the big Idaho spud. So we genetically selected it. So it's kind of like the pug of potatoes.
And they're so different from their earlier counterparts. And I'm constantly thinking about this. Why am I constantly thinking about this? I do though. Government labs that are full of seeds and plants that
Gene
are
banks.
kind of the original,
Totally.
Because that is the threat, is that we would have a virus that would wipe out what we've essentially created, and we'd have to start from scratch with these plants. But when you think about humans eating plants, it even makes more sense that you wouldn't get a whole meal out of a couple of those tiny carrots.
No.
It would supplement, it might keep you alive, but it's not a whole meal.
Well,
and you would have to have probably a much greater variety of plants if you were going to eat quite a few of them or try to get any calories off of them.
I mean, so that's also like a really funny part, is like, who was the person who decided, let me like invest in this, like making this little baby carrot into like a real carrot, Like tomatoes. I think this is a great example. If you have too many tomatoes, it literally upsets your stomach, right? Because they're so acidic, like the cherry tomatoes, for example. Well, tomatoes are in the nightshade family.
Yeah.
Like by default, their entire family is poisonous.
Yeah, it's like 98, 99% of them are completely poisonous.
So like the nightshades are famous for being like, don't eat me.
Yeah.
I'm really toxic.
Yeah.
So just the fact that the byproduct fruit of a nightshade cousin, we're like, yeah, let's cultivate this, or
and let's grind it up and put it in a sauce.
Pistachios.
It'll become pizza, and then we'll eat tons of it.
Right, pistachios. Oh my gosh, pistachios with the pistachio apple. No, cashews. Excuse me.
Okay.
Cashews. So the cashew itself, it has a cashew apple. So it creates this apple fruit thing, and it has this little like a pigtail, little curly Q at the bottom, which is the nut that we actually consume, which is wild to think about because you have to boil it for like hours and bake it, and like, because it's a natural like holder of arsenic, like it makes, or cyanide, I don't know, it makes a really awful, like, don't eat me, I'll kill you.
Yeah.
And how many people had to die to be like, all right, we have to bake it for X amount of hours, like boil it, like it's just wild to think. I'm like, let's put all our eggs in this basket and make this nut. I mean, that's why they're so expensive, is because the tree to the apple that we like, I mean, you don't really eat, no one really eats a cashew apple, and then you eat the nut, and then so much labor that goes into it. Like, it's just wild. I don't know. It blows my mind. Nightshades and arsenic in plants.
Well, and part of this discovery for us was because Andrea has always kind of had stomach issues and has been had to be really careful about what she eats. Sorry, people. I keep touching this microphone. It's my fault. So because she's had to be careful with what she eat, you end up finding these lists of foods that are more or less likely to cause inflammation and hurt your body, and for people who have sensitive stomachs. And what you find across the board is, if it's from an animal, eat as much as you want. If it's from a plant, we're going to start to have some rules. You shouldn't have this, or this
Yeah.
amount. You shouldn't have too much of this or too much of this. It is wild that all of these lists, and I'm talking like people who have to eat for autoimmunity or eat for MS or all these different things.
Sure.
These lists are, hey, if it's an animal, you're going to be fine.
Well,
You know,
I mean, like tuna, for example. You wouldn't want to eat tuna.
and that's a good point.
'Cause,
Fish
like,
have
mercury-
their own kind of things.
Right. I mean,
going
you
on.
also wouldn't want to eat.
Would that have always been the case historically, or is it because we ruin the water?
I would say we're not helping,
No, certainly not.
but I mean, like biomagnification, right? That one big thing at the very top of the food chain eats all the things. So it's basically one little shrimp that had one little molecule of cadmium, which I know sharks are very susceptible to, mercury for tuna. And then that larger fish then eats two. So it's like bioaccumulating.
That makes sense.
Magnifying inside these animals.
Right.
So by the time you make it to the tuna, which is essentially a lion of the ocean, it has the chemical buildup for its entire life.
Right.
Like, there's this really sad story. We talked about orcas.
I'm
right?
sure we did.
About how like female orcas are like often their first calf is just like aborted just because it has bioaccumulated so much toxins via the mom.
Wow.
So then their second calf is often the most successful because it's essentially purged all of the toxins that were in like the mammary milk, you know? So, I mean, I think it's maybe like one case study in like British Columbia, but like that was like a really heavy paper to think about. So you wouldn't want to be eating orca. You don't really want to eat animals at the top of the food chain because they don't reproduce as fast. They have a really important job to regulate the rest of the food chain, and odds are they're the ones that have magnified any residual toxins. Oh, well, on that note, vultures, for example. Oh, they're a really sad story. So there's this really awesome initiative in Africa about how vultures are like it's called the visible extinction or something, where like everyone knows what a vulture is, and like you don't really think twice about vultures, right? But vulture populations are like plummeting right now because they're eating animals that were either killed with pesticides. Like it's their job to be the cleaning crew.
Right.
So then they're dying because they are essentially exclusively eating animals that ate poisons, whether they're rats or like hyenas or like whatever the human population is trying to eradicate, exterminate, relocate, or just even like roadkill, you know?
Yeah.
So these poor vultures are so important. Like vultures have 1,900 adaptations to just crush it. Like why don't they have feathers on their head? It's because they stick their heads into these grody carcasses, right? So they're covered in blood and guts. The sun then bakes the crud off their scaly heads. So they're essentially self-sanitizing.
Interesting.
Yeah, like vultures are amazing. And like that's a perfect example of you wouldn't want to eat a vulture because their job is to eat the gross things.
Yeah, hard to be a scavenger. And we don't eat a lot of scavengers, really. You know, we're so selective about the types of animals that we do eat. But I had never considered that. I mean, tuna is a fairly popular food because it tastes very good, for one thing.
Well, it also depends on the type of tuna. So like saying tuna is like a really, like that's like saying dog, you know? So like bluefin tuna are giant apex predators. And then like skipjack is also a species of tuna that's like itty bitty. So if you want tuna, have skipjack, you know?
What is most commonly in your standard sushi? We talked about this before. But
Yeah,
it's
it
probably
depends.
Like, I mean, I always feel like I see yellowtail
Right.
on the name of the
Albacore.
restaurant, but I don't know
Yeah.
if that's
Yeah, that's like,
albacore. That's what they have in those packets and the tins and stuff, right?
I mean, the pivot is now towards skipjack because it is so much more sustainable. It's lower on the food chain, and by the time you drown it in mayo anyway, you can't really tell.
Right.
So,
Right.
I recommend skipjack.
Who really wants to taste? You know.
Oh, I know, right? No, no, all mayonnaise all the time.
So now that you work with plants more, do you now find yourself eating more fish because you're further removed from thinking about that every day?
Oh,
So
no,
you can feel
no, I'm very omnivorous. Everything's fair game.
Well, you were one of the people I texted. I texted a few people when I knew we were going to get into hunting, and I was like, "Am I about to lose this friendship?" Because I don't know where people stand always on hunting. And the fascinating thing for me has been learning that, honestly, people who, the more they know about conservation of the environment, the more they generally are behind hunting.
I mean,
when it's done
well, right. Like,
exactly.
there's the giant asterisk. Like,
well, in it, but it's only giant, but it's not giant with someone like me, because I'm not the type of person who's going to go out and poach and break laws.
Right.
And
well, poaching isn't
hunting,
right? Poaching is like deliberately illegal.
Exactly.
Like, you are being a monster just for the sake of sport, you know?
Right. But there's even levels of this. I've heard stories, and I will not direct where these stories came from, of hunters who go hunting often, go every year, but have freezers on freezers full of deer meat, and it doesn't matter. They don't need to go hunting because they end up throwing away a lot of deer meat.
Oh.
And that to me feels wrong too, especially because there are programs that exist.
Right.
I forget what they're called. I think one of them is like, I'm going to get it wrong, but I know there are programs for hunters to give away game meat to people who need food, and
Smart.
thousands of pounds of meat go to people who need food. So the fact that you would waste that is a real shame to me too, but it's not technically poaching.
Right. Well, I would say, right.
That's just really unethical.
Food security.
Yeah.
I mean, but then you can make the argument that, like, sometimes deer overabundance is also problematic, right? That deers are often a contributing source of Lyme disease via tick, you know? So, like, as urban sprawl continues, as, like, suburban expansion continues, we're relocating deer, or deer are learning to move into our backyards and, like, eat our plants and our grasses because, like, all you can eat buffet. But then they're, as a result, bringing ticks that carry Lyme disease into human populations. So it's a weird fine line. Also, like, the luckily deer are very adaptable, which is great. Wolves, as their predators, less likely to walk into a neighborhood, you know? So the predator prey equilibrium is starting to, like, fall out of balance. So that's why, like, when you interview the wolf people, like, that's super cool. Wolves are really important. They're the tuna of the land, right? Wolf of the sea, tuna of the land.
I can see it.
Yeah, that works.
There's an argument for it, sure.
But then, like, deer, like, I know that there's like the EPA and all of these, like, state parks have to be very aware of the line of where people can interact with animals only on the grounds that these deer, like, run the risk of encroaching on human space. That's not healthy for either populations.
Right. And I know that I actually know people who do the sort of suburban deer hunting where they really are hunting in suburbs in their backyards, you know, but that still needs to be done just because we're not in the woods at that point. It's still overpopulation.
And see, well, that's the fine line too. Is it forced relocation or is it overpopulation?
It depends how you want to look at it, I think, because should we be continuing to push suburbs further and further and further and taking away our own wilderness? No, of course not. That's not great. But you also want to think about the animals as individuals themselves and the quality of life that they have as animals. The fact is, most of them in these areas are going to be roadkill. That's how they're going to die. It's going to be a pretty rough, violent death. It's not going to be great. And
see, my concern was more like there aren't enough wolves, so there's no check and balance for the deer. So they're still out in their space doing their thing, and now they're just spillover into other space.
Right.
So that's, like, why apex predators are so wildly critical, is because they keep everything in check. If we had more wolves, we'd have less deer, we'd have more human-deer conflicts, you know? So it's kind of that spillover effect that then, like, the forests aren't as healthy because the deer are eating all the plants. So the wolves keep the forest healthy. It's like the sea otter relationship out in the kelp forest, that sea otters eat the urchins that eat the kelp. So kelp forests need otters in order to not be predated on by the herbivores of the ocean. So it's everything's related.
Yeah.
Interconnected.
Well, and it's all supposed to be in balance, and it's so complicated to be.
Right.
It's complicated for us to have the level of consciousness we have because none of these things were necessarily ever supposed to be observed.
Right.
They were just supposed to happen.
Right.
And so now we can observe them and say, oh, this is why this is happening, and then we intervene or we damage environments or whatever. And, you know, I think that the big thing is to take the responsibility back. So we are what we are. We're able to see what we're able to see. And so we need to do what it is we think is best. And
right. Like, your invasive boar hunting is awesome. Those are, like, a nightmare in Florida right now.
But
like,
we also brought them here. You know, it's kind of our fault that they're here in the first place.
Right.
So it's our job to
get rid of them.
Clean it up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's this really cool paper that just came out about how the wild boars are causing the decline of the Florida panther, and how you would think the Florida panther would eat the boars.
Right.
Like, duh, right? Well, it turns out, like, obviously the Florida panthers are more solitary hunters. The pigs travel in packs, essentially. So, I don't know, what's a pack of pig called? Casing? I don't know. What do you call a group of pigs?
I do know this, in fact. It's just going to take me a minute.
Yeah, I don't know. But you would think that the panther would eat the pigs. But the pigs are so aggressive and travel in such large numbers that the panther doesn't, like, waste their time. So it's not that but then the damage the pigs do to the Everglades and the Florida swamp environment is so problematic that it's removing the hiding places of the Florida panther. So as a result, the Florida panthers are having less successful hunting kills because they're ambush predators of X, Y, and Z smaller animal, raccoon, but all the animals can see them now because these boars are bulldozing the hiding spots.
Right.
So it's wild to think that what on paper looks like a food source is actually hurting the predator.
That is interesting.
I know, right?
It's crazy what we know about these animals, and I'm so glad there are people like you who do this work and help educate people like me on the plants and the animals and things I should know.
Well, I appreciate that. I learned all of that at the Naples Zoo. They do amazing Florida panther research. They do a lot of, like, capture release, roadkill help, or, like, road car strike help. They have Florida panthers, which is, like, a very, like, inhuman care there, which is awesome. So if you want a really good zoo experience, the Naples Zoo is doing amazing panther conservation work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Next stop.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of stops to make while we're here in Florida, frankly, and I've got other amazing guests, and I'm sure I'll be doing more jiu-jitsu bullshit. I think I have that planned for tomorrow. So there'll be episodes
Nice.
for all types of people who want to see what we are kind of up to here in Florida. I'm so glad you came back on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Third time's the charm.
I mean, it only gets better.
It only gets better.
Yeah.
I anticipate you being on my show forever. So
We're old growth at this point.
that's what we need to do. So make sure that you're
I'm not going anywhere.
all right. Good. Don't go anywhere. I have abandonment issues. Don't go anywhere. Okay. What else am I missing? That makes 21 puns for you, Ross. Pretty good score for the day.
Not too bad. All right.
Not too bad. Not 22 bad. And see, that was terrible. I tried. I wanted to be like you.
Close. I mean, see, I'm trying to think of one.
You can't do it on the spot. You cannot do it on the spot.
I know. No. It's like,
Do you really practice these at home?
no, I mean, I definitely, like, retain them that, like, I'm not kidding around with these. Just naturally comes to me. And then I don't forget them.
Right.
The one I did with Sally about if you have any questions, I know she has the answer. That one came to me today, which was great.
Should I know what that is?
Well, excuse me. So, like, if you have any questions, we'll come to you with the answer. It's like the, like, reproductive organ on plants, but ferns, like, I don't think have it. So I think that's why she's like, get out. Like,
I understand.
done with you. I'm like,
Right. Right.
oops.
Yeah. There's a limit for most people on how much
I
of you
just-
they can take, and there's no limit for me.
Well.
So
Just can't leave it alone.
that is no. You've already used that one, and so no points for
Okay.
that one. I'm pretty
All
sure.
right.
I think that was one of the first ones we got today.
Ooh.
So
Unbelievable.
yep.
a good one.
I think we have that too.
All right. Well, it's very entertaining.
That actually is a new one. And we did talk about berries, so it really
We did. I got you.
It fits
Yeah.
in. It fits in. Okay. So obviously, if you are coming down to Florida, come down to Marie Selby Botanical Gardens. You'll have a great day here. It's a great place to go. Ross, where can people find you on the internet? You're still-
Absolutely. Like Instagram?
Yep.
Yeah, 100%. Yes. I would love all of you intellectuals out there to hang out with me on Instagram. It's a lot of puns. So it's science content and mainly puns, let's be real. My Instagram handle is SoRossome. SOROSSSOME. So 3 S's in a row. ROSSSOME.
Perfect. As always, I'll have that linked in the episode. Stay tuned because I have a little video about kind of our fun that we had here today. You will get more facts. You will also get Fern facts, which I could not, there's no way I could remember them all and give them to you on the podcast. So those will be in the episode, I'm sure, too. And I think that's it for my general housekeeping. Thank you, everybody, so much for listening. As always, if you don't mind hitting the subscribe button for me, that is very helpful. Go follow Ross. Come to the garden. Eat plants if you want. Don't eat plants if you don't want. Whatever you want to do is fine.
As long as they don't eat you.
As long as they don't eat you. And that's really the key to today's episode. So thanks for listening. As always, we will see you on the next episode.